Ever thought of a game existing that was a cooperative party game dungeon adventure that allowed for players to customize their own dungeons and overcome a variety of puzzles, monsters, and challenges, resulting in the ability to reap the rewards and customize and equip your own character and avatar? Well, while we've had some similar titles to what I've just described, and a slew of other party games, we haven't quite seen a serious dungeon builder added onto such a game or genre, allowing theoretically younger kids to be able to both create and play in these dungeons, and we haven't seen it done in such an accessible way. King of Meat. I know, bear with me. The name is meaty, but the actual game itself is a lot more lighthearted than it might sound. King of Meat is about teaming up with 4 other players and working together to overcome the various challenges that you'd face, designed sort of like a game show. King of Meat, developed by Glowmade and published by Amazon Game Studios, a recurring member in our series Death of a Game, a series where we investigate the large contributing factors to the death or dying of a game or company, and do so by investigating a timeline of events that showcases various clues, developer testimonies, player feedback, and of course, bits of evidence unfolding as the timeline does. Once we've gathered enough clues, we will crack the case for good during our final deduction. You know, every detective's favorite moment in the sun, and stay extra tuned for the end, where we tease about what the next episode's going to be about too. King of Meat, which launched back in October of 2025, despite being a fun and interactive dungeon crawler, was the hit it was expected to be, and currently sits at 10 players playing on Steam. And it was expected to have as many as 100,000 playing the game concurrently by leadership involved. As such, Glowmade would suffer from layoffs just recently as of December 2025, with the future of King of Meat, even just months after it launched, seeming quite murky and unsure. That's why we decided to feature King of Meat in the series. Well, detectives, grab your meat. Scratch that. And let's team up in King of Meat. We have dungeons to conquer. Hello detectives, this video is brought to you by Apex Gaming PCs, who I teamed up with for this video to showcase some of their new premier custom PCs on their website. Why Apex Gaming PCs? Well, they allow for things like financing, offer industry-leading components, and allow you to game at the highest levels. Apex Gaming PCs have a large catalog of different types of PCs, all from different price ranges, and I wanted to showcase a couple of them for you guys. Starting with the Apex Bronze, which comes standard with an AMD Ryzen 3 4500, RTX 3050, and 16GB of RAM to create the perfect entry-level PC for those looking to upgrade their PC over time, and priced at under $1,000 pre-tax or delivery. The Apex Streamer, on the other hand, comes standard with an AMD Ryzen 7 5700X, 32GB of RAM, and an RTX 5060 Ti to create the perfect mid-level PC and streaming-ready gaming PC still, priced around about $1,600. The Apex Streamer Plus comes standard with an AMD Ryzen 5 7600X, 32GB of DDR5 RAM, and an RTX 5070 to create the perfect high-level PC. This is a serious PC for those wanting to be able to stream and game without any issues on the highest settings for just about every game, and it's priced accordingly at $2,200 or so. Don't forget to click on my link below and save 3% using my code NERD at apexgamingpcs.com/nerdslayer. Let's get back to the case. The story begins with the founding of the developer behind the game that we're covering today, Glowmade. Founded in 2015 by former industry vets from Lionhead Studios, Johnny Hopper, Adam Sibic, and Mike Green. Former Little Big Planet and Fable developers now stationed in the small British town of Guildford, UK, located outside of London. We wouldn't hear anything about them publicly for another 6 years, however likely meaning that they were slowly scaling things up and shopping for ideas that they wanted to work on. 6 years, though, is a long time. So either they already had some serious backing or had enough funds to keep prototyping for at least a few years. Amazon Game Studios would step in and claim parenthood on Glowmade in their next game, which they would announce publicly September 2021. A new game was teased as well, dubbed a creative new cooperative experience. AGS was in the process of publishing another title that I've also covered on the series Lost Ark and, well, actually, New World as well, which just literally launched the day before this announcement, which would also later be covered on our series. Amazon Game Studios, despite their hoopla and big promises, haven't been so successful in the gaming department. First you had Breakaway, a game that never even launched despite having its own esport facility that I actually visited whenever I visited Amazon Game Studios. Then you have Crucible, which launched and failed twice, another we covered on the series. And finally, New World, which had a big early success before falling off of a total cliff and being relegated to a console spin-off, and then abandoned. And then of course Lost Ark came, and they published that, but that game had its own issues too, and lost a ton of players quickly. Oh, speaking of which, they're actually shutting down the console version of New World now too. These games were all able to generate hype and have a big marketing push, but overwhelming misunderstandings of the markets they were entering in littered throughout, and a lack of total stamina to see any of the projects out plagued the projects. This is relevant because this was the publisher that was set to back the new Glowmade project, which likely meant that if Glowmade couldn't show early success, they wouldn't have support for long. King of Meat would be announced publicly much later, likely being much closer to a launch date by that point, 3 years later, as many games would take between 4 to 5 years to launch. Today, we're thrilled to unveil King of Meat, an imaginative and exciting new IP developed by Glowmade that marks a significant step in that direction. Glowmade have created a rich and vibrant world in King of Meat, and deliver an incredibly fun and compelling gameplay experience for players. We're excited about the variety of ways players can express themselves through creative cooperative gameplay and dungeon creation, and we're looking forward to King of Meat captivating players around the world at launch and beyond. King of Meat, I know, I have to come clean fast. I absolutely hate the name. Not only does it do nothing to actually explain what the game's about, the humor seems a bit dark or even sexual, which is both totally fine, I'm okay with that stuff, but this was being targeted towards kids, with less serious tones and themes featured throughout, like, for example, killing non-humanoids. But the name and that aside, the actual idea sounded kind of cool, with hints of Spiral Knights, another online RPG we already covered in the series, and of course, the famous platform Roblox. King of Meat was the idea that giving players the power of creativity will give the game longevity and success. Something that we've seen so many in other survival games, but something that we haven't quite seen, attempted in a more cooperative focused game. King of Meat would have its first major preview in the summer of 2024. An MMORPG would claim that the game featured some surprisingly tight gameplay and would only continue in polish as the game became more playable, but also would say that they had mixed thoughts about the game, as they could tell that their big feature and the core of the game of King of Meat was the Creator mode. The Create mode was the toolset that was given to players to create proper dungeons, whether filled with various monsters or puzzles, or both. But this system wasn't as easy as it sounds on the surface. It still required a trigger system, dubbed the Logic mode in the game. While I found that the Create system and tools in King of Meat, or KOM, are actually quite intuitive and powerful, especially given the type of players that they're targeting, I'm someone who was modding when I was like 10 years old, so I'm kind of disqualified from the general market audience here. Honestly, I echo MMORPG's sentiments here, which is that if you're not interested in these custom tools and how they could be used in King of Meat, the rest of what was there just wasn't so meaty. King of Meat would launch a year later in the fall of 2025, October 2nd, where it would have its early access period for those who pre-ordered the game first, and then launching fully October 7th, 2025. But while other Amazon Game Studios projects seem to have limitless advertisement and marketing, King of Meat seemed to launch largely undetected. Some clues, of course, can be seen right before the launch of the game, with how little coverage the videos that Glowmade was pumping out seemed to be picked up or watched by players. Sure, the trailers had their numbers on them, and were hits. Outside of those trailers though, the actual community building videos and gameplay specific ones had little actual views, with some having as low as 1,000 views. And Amazon's classic unsuccessful strategy of teasing the game a year before they launch it with no community building didn't seem to be a working strategy in a game that was solely built on community involvement. The majority of the marketing budget seemed to also have been dedicated to, seemingly at the last second, to attracting the biggest creators and streamers, having them cover the game, regardless of demographics or if the partnership was actually a good fit. Some felt mixed about the primary sponsorship they seemed to go with to market their game. One of the biggest, if not the biggest creators in the world, Mr. Beast. They would team up with the YouTuber and do a King of Meat challenge, one that would later be playable in the game as well as a tie-in. While this video has a ton of views at 7.5 million, which is more than trailers of the game itself, there isn't a guarantee the strategy was going to convert to a player base, especially when the game itself seemed to have a limited ceiling in a sense, which I will cover more about in detail shortly. Glowmade would also sponsor other big creators, like a crew of them, like AMP, a big streamer group who seemed like they were kind of unlikely as a team up for this sort of game. They're more of a humor or social gamer type of crew, and not overly big gamers in any way. While this might seem minor, by estimates, Mr. Beast might have cost between 2.5 to 5 million himself, while the other crew easily cost between 5 to 6 figures in dollars spent. That means that the large amount of the money easily that was going to be spent on the marketing budget for the game was already spent, and it was spent on a gamble that we have repeatedly not seen work. While creators do have major impacts on games, the game sponsorships have to make sense and be transferable as a customer base to the game in question. King of Meat, as we will discuss it now, was a bit of a confusing mashup that it perhaps didn't know what audience they were trying to target in the end anyway, which could have been why this sort of thing would happen. This was the sort of game they needed to have slow and honest community building with, not like a popularity bomb from people who probably aren't even interested. The gameplay in King of Meat was interesting. It was like they mixed Spiral Nights with Neverwinter Nights, with better gameplay than the former and a less powerful create mode than the latter. And of course a less serious overall theme. Closer to a game in the same vein as like Among Us or Fall Guys. The combat on the surface is a low button input hack and slash combat, but players can customize their weapon arsenal, which affects your actual class. For example, the sword and shield build is balanced, classic style. But then you have things like arcane knuckles, a guitar axe or gax, and a bomb launcher. I love this because so often games take it safe with classes or move them altogether, harming your identity as the gamer in the process. Developers, take notes. You start by spawning into the hub world, where you can converse and group with other players. You can then choose with some created dungeons from either the developers, of which there's at least a couple dozen, or where the actual strength was supposed to lie, which is the community-made dungeons that would follow. The game would then score a tepid 70 out of 100 on aggregate review website Metacritic. IGN Spain would enjoy the game at its core, and the mix of platforming, action, and puzzles presented throughout the game that they thought were fun, but felt like the actual core of the game was not the game itself, but was more of like the community-created level aspect and maps that would take time to come, or potentially not come at all. With the last two parts being more so my words. Shaq News, who covered the game, would claim regarding it that I'm not sure King of Meat has truly captured my interest in order to keep me coming back after my work obligations are over. It's a cute, welcoming multiplayer action game with a lot of challenges and interesting mechanics, but it also feels like I've pretty much seen everything there is after a few days of playing. Hopefully this time there will be more variety with post-launch content additions and a robust player content creation suite. I might not be around for it. So what about the Steam reception? It would fare actually better there at a mostly positive rating of 77 out of 100. Well, sort of. The Steam release unfortunately wouldn't draw up that much attention at all. They would only reach an incredibly low peak players of 246. Enough to fill exactly like 61.5 servers or whatever, which was not what Glowmade was expecting, nor Amazon. Nor even close to what would be needed to actually maintain a population or grow it, when the majority of the game is supposed to be about user-generated content. To make matters even worse, the matchmaking reportedly would have endless queues and issues with connecting, making the already small player base feel even smaller. This is where we reach a fatal clue regarding King of Meat, the same one we have seen in a few other titles in the Death of Game series. King of Meat developers Glowmade had built a cool and intuitive toolset, but forgot to really build the rest of the game. Sure, the combat was fun, and the classes are actually better than many virtual worlds, but the actual content you had was pretty slim pickings. It's just dungeons, especially when you remember that the game cost $30. There's no actual story, no connection to the characters, or much to the hub world that you spawn into. It feels like a hollow game experience that was better off being like a free-to-play offering. That price point was hard when Fall Guys was free. Among Us was just a couple of dollars, and Spiral Nights, another similar style cooperative dungeon game, was also free. Sure, they didn't have to put microtransactions in the game in this case or rely heavily on skin sales, but this price point was not competitive in the market, not when compared to other similar market-seeking titles like the ones I just mentioned. And back to my previous point, the most creative game we can use as an example didn't even have a base game to it. Like Minecraft did, is Roblox, except Roblox was free, so we circle back around. Whether King of Meat was pressured to have a box price by Amazon, or it was Glowmade's ill-fated decision, ultimately, it was an unreachable price point, especially with no multiple pack sales included. King of Meat's first major update, as more content was planned, would come November 19th, 2025, dubbed the Winter Update. This update would introduce an interesting idea of PvP races, though don't be confused. Glowmade made the choice to make their King of Meat game a cooperative experience, which usually means not getting involved in PvP. So in this case, PvP means things like time trials, not actual PvP where you fight each other or something like that. The peak population would actually move a little bit up, but we're talking like 246 players on Steam, and likely not much more on other platforms where King of Meat had priced themselves out. It's going to be hard to make changes with a publisher hovering over you and you potentially running out of money and not being able to even make more. Glowmade was in a tough spot. Their barely launched game was already totally flopping, and they seemingly had played all of their cards concerning it because they didn't seem to address any of that publicly. It was unlikely that Amazon Game Studios would allow them to keep going longer with King of Meat, up until their contracted point because the game was a live service game, sure, though not much was promised post-launch besides what had already come with the Winter Update, seemingly. It really seemed like the whole game plan was, community-made content will keep our game alive and allow us to continue development. I think launching a more competitive commercial product though, and then slowly expanding that would have been a much better endeavor. And I think besides the price point, there's another issue. That's target market. While Roblox ended up with a large number of young players, like over half of their player base is like 16 or younger, the platformer game itself wasn't necessarily built with that in mind. It just kind of ended up getting a COPPA seal for being kid approved, and blew up with the youth kind of as a consequence. It was also free, which probably really helped. These two big differences make King of Meat a much harder game to sell. You're trying to sell a complex game to a younger audience, and a young audience that doesn't typically have the kind of resources to even pay for a game. Which is why microtransactions are so effective with the youth, because it's like a pushing wave, instead of one big wave at one moment that you have to overcome. And look, I made it clear I wasn't a fan of the name, but the name in this case doesn't do it any favors either. It doesn't talk or tease creativity. It doesn't even explain anything about what the core of the game is. I'm honestly shocked that Amazon Game Studios would even publish a game with a name like this. And that's my final issue with Glowmade. I actually think that they're really talented. I don't think that this is their kind of game to make though, clearly. Their off-brand of humor and desire to push boundaries seemed to be better suited for a more indie game that didn't necessarily have to worry about making dozens of millions in the same way. King of Meat would be dubbed a flop commercially December 10th, 2025 as the population would drop to just 31 players peak, and 13 on average on Steam. Reportedly, Amazon Game Studios had been expecting as much as 100,000 players concurrently. It's not exactly stated as to who the leadership that was expecting this was, whether it was Glowmade or AGS, but with my experience behind the scenes with AGS, I'm going to say it was probably them. In my experience with AGS, they seem to have a corporate expectation despite no footprint in gaming yet, and no actual unique products made yet that have shipped or sold, or eventually became what was promised. Meaning they still expected their games to be top performers in spite of anything else, without the dedication needed to achieve that goal, and when things aren't achieved, quickly, immediately pulling the plug without much time or money invested into the strategies further. It had proven to be a strategy that didn't seem to be working, but they kept at it. Regardless, even if just recently, New World's console version, Eternum, which they pivoted to, was shut down altogether, easily culminating in one of the biggest industry flops ever. And King of Meat was sadly set to join them as well. It's not just that they couldn't reach expectations that were placed on them, it's that realistically, they probably never were going to be able to. How could they have reached Among Us or Fall Guys numbers despite those games being far more casual and allowing for far more players to play together? And, well, being affordable and free? Well, they just couldn't. Glowmade would be hit with layoffs the following day, and how many wasn't specified, but why was. It was because King of Meat failed to meet internal expectations by a significant margin, as it failed to even reach just 1,000 players concurrently across all platforms reportedly. Where the future of King of Meat is set to go is not really a mystery anymore. At least not for this detective. That's why I featured it in the series. I thought it was a game that's ready for investigation, and here we are, as a game that easily cost dozens of millions or less fails to even gain enough players for double-digit lobbies. While King of Meat isn't shut down yet, I can't imagine it's going to last much longer, most likely being put into maintenance mode pretty shortly in the future, just like other titles in the series like Foam Stars. And so, the timeline has come to an end, detectives, and we have gathered enough clues and bits of evidence to finally deduce this case. Why did the King of Meat fail to meet expectations? Well, in case you missed any of the clues along the way, an awful and nondescript name that sounds like the name of a porno flick, a lack of core and meaningful gaming experiences, no proper community building for a community-based game, Amazon published it but didn't actually show up, like that parent who was never around, priced out of the competition. They had a conflicted target market. They had expensive and ineffective marketing. Well, detectives, I wouldn't be so bummed for Glowmade. Sure, King of Meat didn't work out, and they likely have to lose some casualties in the process, but that's just art. And they are really talented developers in my opinion, as King of Meat I think showcased. They just need a bit more business guidance I think, or perhaps more consultancy on that front. Hit my line. They are the kind of developers featured in the series that I can imagine making a hit after being featured like Stunlock Studios did with V Rising. Until then, I look forward to what they make next, and more cooperative or party games to come from the market in the future. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments below your thoughts on my meat. King of Meat, and why you liked or didn't like the game, and any reasons I might have missed as to why the game failed so spectacularly. Until the next case.
Ancient evil searches for these lost fragments, destroying anything in their path. You must find them.